After the Paris attacks, it's easy to blame Muslims. Look, it was radical Muslims who did the attack, and it's not the first time. But what we want you to do is think about which Muslims, right? And a lot of people say, well, look, it's the ideology of Islam that does it, so everybody bears some responsibility, right? That's why they ask other Muslims to denounce these Muslims, Muslim leaders to jump in. They just need everybody to denounce it. Now, denouncing it is easy enough, and almost every Muslim leader in the West does denounce it, and even some Muslim leaders in other parts of the world also denounce them. Iran, among others, has denounced this too, but that's easy enough because Iran hates ISIS. That's their top enemy, which exactly gets us to the point of which Muslims are you talking about. And the ones you don't often see are the victims. In the Paris attacks, there were also Muslim victims, including Halima Saadi and Huda Saadi. They were two sisters who were killed in the cafes. Their brother, Khalid, survived, and he had this amazing story to tell.
Il y avait 3 anniversaires, dont celui de ma sœur. Donc avec énormément de monde en terrasse, et à partir de 9h30, moi j'étais à l'intérieur et ils sont arrivés, voilà, et ils ont tiré sur tout le monde à l'intérieur, à l'extérieur, sur la terrasse, ils ont tué tout le monde. Avec donc mes 2 sœurs et tous mes amis, et les amis de ma sœur qui sont partis ce soir-là. Moi, je me suis mis à plat ventre en espérant ne pas être touché. Donc j'ai pas été touché. Et ensuite, quand j'ai entendu il y avait plus de tirs, donc je me suis levé, je suis regardé un peu et ils sont remis à tirer, donc je me suis recaché et j'ai attendu que ça se calme. Et dès qu'il y avait plus de tirs, c'était à l'aise, c'était chercher mes 2 sœurs. Donc j'en ai trouvé une, la première, Halima Saadi, qui était décédée sur le coup. Et il restait ma 2e sœur, Oda, que j'ai essayé de secourir. Donc je l'ai déplacée avec l'aide d'un ami à elle qui s'appelle Sam.
So he carried her in his arms to the other cafe, waited for help, and was trying to help others as well. And he came back, and his second sister had also died. So Abdullah, who's their friend, who was sitting next to him, we're going to hear from him at the end, obviously very emotional. I mean, your friends, your sisters, your family members dying right in front of you. And so they're not alone. Of course, for example, on 9/11, there were many Muslim victims as well. 31 that were killed here in the United States who were in America and were killed by the radicals that hit us on 9/11. And then when you look at a broader cross-section of where the terrorism happens, obviously it happens in a lot of Muslim countries, right? So the attackers are radical Muslims, but the victims are oftentimes Muslims as well. So let me give you some context there. Between 2004 and 2013, the UK suffered 400 terrorist attacks, mostly in Northern Ireland, and almost all of them were non-lethal. Okay, so those were not for Muslims, but again, that's why when Muslim fundamentalists hit, oftentimes they are lethal, so you don't hear a lot of the non-Muslim ones because they're smaller or they're non-lethal. So that's realistic, that's real. Now the US suffered 131 attacks, fewer than 20 of which were lethal. France suffered 47 attacks, but in Iraq, in that same time period, there were 12,000 attacks and 8,000 of them were lethal. So I'm asking you not to give in to temptation. The easy thing to do is to say Muslims did it, right? The reality is it is radical Muslims, fundamentalist Muslims, who are terrorists. It's clearly not all Muslims, and most people don't say all Muslims. Some right-wingers say it, but most Americans, Westerners, do not say all Muslims, right? But sometimes you'll hear most Muslims, or some Muslims, or generalizing about Muslims in general. So I'm asking you to remember the Muslim victims as well. And so if you're going to lash out, remember, they've already been lashed out against. The terrorists hit them first. They hit them hardest. They killed more Muslims than any other religion, right? So they've already been battered. Don't forget that. And I want to end on a hopeful note. So it's incredibly sad, but I want you to hear the words of Abdullah as our last words here in this video, and keep it in mind.
On est tous
des habitants de cette planète et on doit se battre les uns pour les autres et s'entraider tout simplement. Voilà, il y a des Noirs, il y a des Arabes, il y a eu des Juifs. On a tous été touchés en fait. Tous. Donc voilà, on est tous dans le même panier, tous dans le même sac, tout simplement.